Hello everyone, welcome back to the USAgp F1 channel, and this is your post-sprint quali F1 fantasy talking points, because yes, we've just had the sprint quali and the team deadlines have not taken place yet, and that is so good because oh my god, sprint quali was chaos. And honestly, I'm not even going to beat around the bush. I have no idea who's going to end up winning this race. It genuinely could be Russell, it could be Hamilton in the actual race, it could be Verstappen, it could be Leclerc, it could be Norris. They all looked fast, and if they got their laps together, could all go and win a race. So it's going to be very tight this weekend, and that's why we need to talk about a few things. Remember, I will be live an hour and a half before the qualifying to go over all of this again and a little bit more in more detail as well. However, this video's for anyone who wants to watch anything before my live or for anyone who can't make it. So the first thing is I have to go straight back off the Lawson 10th place grid penalty. Yes, it does make Lawson a very good option, but with how well we've been seeing in particularly Hulkenberg do around this track, I knew Haas would do well, but not that well. They could score some serious points in actual F1 and some serious points in F1 fantasy. If they both come in the top 8, they are getting more points than even Lawson would get starting at the back and finishing in like 15th or 14th. So for me, it is all about bringing Hulkenberg into your team. Magnuson's a little bit of a different story because he is so expensive. I still prefer Lawson over Magnuson, but Hulkenberg, how 100% is the cheap driver you want to bring in if you can afford him, because yes, double Sauber still looks good. They look completely off the pace, so that means if there's a few crashes, which it looks like there could be with how many mistakes we're seeing, then they are a decent move to get in those premium drivers such as the Verstappen, such as the Norrises, such as the Leclercs, or even the Piastris. Now, this is definitely not the weekend for the extra DRS chip, and I would go as far as to say even limitless, because even though we know the top 5 are probably still going to be Norris, Verstappen, Leclerc, Piastri in the actual race, and he's going to recover it a bit, and probably someone like Russell or Sainz. The issue is your 2 times is so important and still on limitless, and we have no idea who's going to get the most points, fastest lap and driver of the day. It might not even be the person who wins. And then on top of that, for extra DRS, you just need to have the top 2 drivers, and normally it has to be a pretty consistent top 2. And I don't think those sprint quali results really show what the race is actually going to be like. So I very much think steer clear of extra DRS. It looks like it's actually an autopilot weekend, because we're going to be having a lot of teams with Norris Verstappen, Norris Piastri, Piastri Leclerc, Piastri Verstappen. A lot of these teams which need autopilot because any of them could score big this weekend. Now, one of the premium drivers I need to speak about is Oscar Piastri, because yes, he's qualified really badly down in 16th position. However, that does mean he's a very juicy option to be using for especially the sprint quali, because he'll probably outscore everyone, because there's enough time in that really fast McLaren to get probably up to around 10th to 12th. And that, by the way, is around 10 to 12 points, which is more than first place gets. So he could get more points than Verstappen would in this sprint quali. So I'm very much expecting Piastri to be a hot pick for everyone. However, I would mention, if you are going for Piastri and you don't want to be risky, I would recommend no negative. There is a big chance he could be in a tangle because he'll be starting in the midfield. And if that happens, you are completely screwed for the rest of the weekend, where you get a crash, getting loads of negative points before the race is actually even started. Now, premium drivers, I wouldn't go anywhere near. Would of course be Perez. He's in 11th. He doesn't look like he's going to get anything better out of that car. And sadly, Lewis Hamilton. Now, he did just cock up his lap, and he probably would have been as fast as Russell if he didn't screw up that corner coming off the back straight. However, I just think it looks like he's too inconsistent. I would recommend going for someone cheaper as well if you wanted to go for one of those differentials, because let's get real, Hamilton would have been a differential. So I would rather go for the likes of a Russell or a Sainz for a differential for now. Then for cheap drivers, you do not want to go anywhere near. First off, the Aston Martin drivers. So Fernando Alonso technically isn't a cheap driver, but I would steer clear of him just in general anyway. And then Lance Stroll, it looks like they're in that middle F1 fantasy ground from 10th to 15th, where you're not going to get overtakes, you're not going to get positions gained, you're probably just going to stick around where you were. And that can be really detrimental because everyone else is getting loads of other points ahead of you or behind you. And then also to top off that list, sadly, it is Kevin Magnuson, just because he's too expensive. And I do think you shouldn't be wasting all of your money on a cheap driver like him, especially when Colapinto, Hulkenberg, Lawson, the Saubers as a safe option still look pretty decent. I don't think it's worth bringing in Kevin Magnuson this weekend. Then constructor-wise, it's a little bit of a crazy story because, like I mentioned, no one knows who's going to win this race, and that means constructors-wise, they're all probably going to score similar points. You could literally have a Mercedes-Ferrari team, and I still think it would work out for you. It's one of those things where I just think it depends on where your team is and how many free transfers you have. So, if you have enough free transfers to go from McLaren down to Mercedes and have Mercedes and Ferrari, and that means you can afford to have the likes of Verstappen and Norris, then I would do something like that. But if you drop down from McLaren to Mercedes and it means you can increase Albon to a Lawson, I don't think it's worth doing something like that. It has to be a major change to your team to change to constructors. Otherwise, I would just stick with what you've got. Don't waste a free transfer on them, because at the end of the day, it is anyone's guess to know who the top constructor is going to be this weekend. Could be McLaren with Piastri getting a lot of points with the positions gained. Could be Ferrari. They could find some pace in the race. Could be Mercedes. They could actually hold on for once. Or it could be Verstappen with Red Bull because he wins every single race and that puts Red Bull right at the top of the list, even with Perez doing bad. So for me, just stick with the constructors you've got and focus on those premium drivers instead for your free transfers. Then finally, let's talk about the team selections that you can use this weekend. Now, for me, there are 3 team selections that you could go for, and they are all pretty actually different. Now, the first one, which you can see on your screens right now, is the sprint shock result, which a lot of people will probably go towards when they make their team after sprint qualifying, which consists of Verstappen, Russell, Colapinto, Bottas, Zhou, McLaren, and Mercedes or Ferrari. I would stick with Ferrari for now. The reason for this is we've seen the sprint quali results. These are what the teams look like could be the best. But for me, this would be, again, a risky move to go for, because like I mentioned, I don't think sprint qualifying showed exactly where everyone is. Everyone came out at different times of the qualifying. People screwed up their laps. I think there's more to show from McLaren and Ferrari. But if you wanted to go for a team like this because they did well, then this is your benchmark. However, like I always mention, you can increase Zhou to Albon if you have the money in your team. And then if you have even more money, you could then increase Albon to Lawson, and then Lawson to Hulkenberg. And that is how a team after sprint qualifying would look. However, we have 2 other teams, and this is the second one. So this team is very much sticking to the roots of what F1 Fantasy was before this sprint qualifying, and it's the triple McLaren team. Now, you might think I'm absolutely bonkers for going triple McLaren, considering what we saw from them. However, we saw that Norris kind of screwed up his lap in the final qualifying session. I think there's still more to come from him. And with Piastri starting so low in the sprint qualifying, I've already talked about this, he could get a lot of points. So I think this is the staying the course team. And honestly, it's not a bad team at all. With Norris, Piastri, again, Colapinto, Bottas, Zhou, with McLaren and Ferrari. However, again, like the other team, you can increase Zhou to Albon, Albon to Lawson, and then Lawson to Hulkenberg if you have the money. And then, my God, even if you have more money than that, you could increase Bottas to an Albon. However, that is the gist of what that sort of team will be like. This is most likely the team I will be running in Cota, because I don't have enough free transfers to be messing about moving to Verstappen, Russell, and also, like I mentioned, I don't have full faith in them just yet. Then finally, for the single premium driver team, for anyone who can't afford these big double premium driver builds, then I would go for this: Verstappen, Albon, Hulkenberg, Lawson, Colapinto, McLaren, and Ferrari. You get the 2 best constructors realistically. You get the 4 best cheap drivers, with Colapinto's performance of recent, Alex Albon in that Williams, a decent move from him. It's more just because he's a cheap driver who's not a Sauber. Then Hulkenberg and Lawson with his 10-place grid penalty, and Hulkenberg looking very spicy this weekend. With, of course, your top man, with the 2 times being Max Verstappen. Again, who knows if he's actually going to be the fastest, but for me, he looks that right now, so you have to bring him in your team for the single premium driver builds. However, thank you all so much for watching. That is everything that you need to know post-sprint quali for your F1 Fantasy teams. It's going to be a wild one this weekend, and I do think it's going to be quite tight between Leclerc, Piastri, Verstappen, Norris, all on points, and it's gonna come down to these fastest lap driver of the day picks. My God, I'm excited for it, but hey, it makes F1 Fantasy a crazy option at the minute, but I think that's better because sprint races are good fun, but normally we sort of get to cheat and see how well everyone's gonna do. Not this weekend. Anyway, I'll see you all at my live. Hope you all have a great rest of your day, and bye-bye.